My name is Richard Eugene Bird. I don't know why the Eugene is put in there. I don't know where it comes from. Richard, again, I was too young to understand why they named me Richard Eugene Bird. And so, because I down to it, I was named with my twin brother. They had a different name for him, and Mom didn't like it, what Dad wanted, and so he came out Donald Clyde Bird, where I'm Richard Eugene Bird, and so he had to be corrected with name change because of my mama. I was born at the same time, 10 minutes earlier than my twin brother Don. So I'm older and have had authority over him until we reached probably age 5, and then he took over. But no, I'm just kidding. When it comes right down to it, we were living in Glendale, Arizona, just out of Phoenix, and that's where we were when we were born, Don and I. What?
Tell about it.
Tell about what?
When you were born.
I don't know what to tell.
You can tell.
Can I tell? Well, remember that I can't remember, but anyway, the other kids had to be outside while you and Don were being born, and then your dad came out and told all of them that there were twins. Can you remember that?
Yeah, that's true. Okay. When I was born, Dad, of course they were surprised. It's quite different from what it is nowadays. But he went out to inform my siblings, who were under a tree waiting for news. And so Dad had to go out and tell them they were twins. And so it's quite a surprise. And what's interesting too is that being twins, our sisters kind of split us up, and Marie took care of Don, and my sister Jane took care of me. And so that's the way that they helped Mom with the twins, which were probably quite a burden for Mom to take care of. My background of understanding who my father and my mother really were. Mother, after Dad died, took over raising us, and so we were very close. My siblings with Mom, she was just an angel and such an eloquent, wonderful lady, and so she was right by our side and by my side, but Dad is kind of a mystery as I look back with him. I remember a few things. I remember, in a sense, a witness of him, because I remember on occasion where we had it wasn't a new car, but it was new to us, and I, with Don, would want to go out and sit in the car, and Daddy would come out and be with us, and he's probably watching us closely so that we wouldn't hurt the car, but who knows. But anyway, there was an association, I remember, from that. I also remember from Dad the funeral, going to the hospital before he died, communicating with him. I don't know what we talked about, but in a sense it was saying goodbye to Daddy, which I didn't realize I was doing. And so at his bedside in Blythe, California, at the hospital, he was in the process of dying from yellow jaundice, and it was a tough time for my Mom. Dad was an interesting person from this standpoint. He was an ordained minister in the Presbyterian Church, but Presbyterian ministers, my mother always, when people would say, oh, they did it for the money, she would just scoff at him and say, "Not so," because we never really made money when Eldred Holloway Bird, that's his name, Eldred Holloway Bird, was preaching. He did it because it's from his heart. And Mom would get irritated for that particular situation and people referring to that. But he also was a boxer. He was a marvelous boxer, apparently, because he fought apparently 107 fights, and he won over 103 or 4 of them. And he even boxed the world champion, unofficially. But he got hit in the throat, and it affected his speech. And he talked on a high pitch like a child after he got injured from that. But anyway, what is interesting too is that he taught boxing in the service, and he was involved in that an awful lot. And there was injuries that he abstained while he was boxing and teaching, and apparently had a lasting effect on his body in a very detrimental way. And so that's what literally took his life in years later, when he was only about 52 when he died. But anyway, remarkable man, and there's some marvelous stories. What's interesting, just to highlight one thing about Daddy, is that 50 years after he died, there's an article in the San Francisco paper about my dad. And it was a gentleman who remembered Daddy and wrote stories about what he had witnessed about Dad. And they were colorful. And one situation was that was related was that he was taking a load of material, supplies, over the mountain in Arizona. I'm not sure it was Arizona, but I think it was. And it was a one-way road. It was a steep cliff-type mountain situation. And he couldn't turn around. It was a truck loaded, and he's limited with gas. He didn't even know if he'd get to his destination because of lack of gas. Or another gentleman came up, and wanted him to back up all the way. And Daddy wouldn't do it. So they got out and he said, "Well, I'm going to fight you then." That's what the guy said. He didn't realize he was facing a boxer. And so they proceeded to get out, and the guy didn't last long. I think it was one punch. And so anyway, he won. And so the other guy had to back up several miles, I believe. And so Daddy, out of absolute desperation, had to do that. But there's some remarkable stories about my dad that I wish I had more of them. But it's interesting that 50 years after he died, it comes out in the San Francisco paper. I got choked up too, but anyway. My mom, she's also a graduate. Both of them graduated from college in North Carolina. And so Mom was trained as an English teacher, a teacher of English, and she was a remarkable, eloquent, quiet lady that had power without exhibiting power. Just her lovely, gracious demeanor. All we needed to be corrected with was a look of sadness from her. Swearing has never been a problem in my life because my mother was strict, but it doesn't fit a description of her. She just made it known that when she spoke, you better watch closely. And she didn't have to use words because her expressions would tell you what side of the fence that you're on. And so an example of that is I never learned how to swear because of her. On one occasion, I was mad at Don, and we were fighting, I guess, or he was talking to me, and I told him to shut up. Mom heard that, and I ended up on the wood pile. And here it is Don's fault. It had to be. And so I was the one punished for using the word shut up. And man, you can imagine if I were to really swore, what the reaction would be. I probably would have ended up in the canal. But anyway, she was such a gracious, wonderful mother and had such a responsibility. Fortunately, because of the training and the college graduate, she was able to take care of the family. And so that became a great blessing when she ended up teaching with us as children, and she did a best she could with me. But anyway, Dad died when I was 4 years old, and so even now I look back over the years and how terribly hard that was for Mom when Dad died, because she was so totally dependent on his help, him doing things. And so she hadn't learned how to do those things. And Beth, on the other hand, because of my health situation, has learned to take care of herself, to be independent, to do things, and to reach out and make telephone calls, and be my secretary, and my everything. And what a difference that was for my mother, who didn't have that opportunity because of the suddenness. Of course, they knew he was going to die, but not. You never get prepared for such a thing. You know, it's an interesting thing as I look at my siblings when I was a little child, how much they meant to me as friends. Jack had got to the age where after Daddy died, he just had to take off. And I think he's only about 14 or so, and so he went on his own and with his friends. And what's interesting about Jack, being my oldest brother, was one of the original Hell's Angels on the Indian motorcycle. And he'd rush from LA to Blythe and back and forth with his friends. He had a drinking problem. They didn't have drugs then. But he was a character, yeah, I guess. But what a model to follow. I didn't follow him. But he was such that I looked up to him always, my big brother. And then there's Marie, my oldest sister. She's the oldest of the clan. And she's just she's small, hardly over 5 foot, and almost both ways later. But she's just such an angel. Just you could find a better sister than Marie. And she married a man that was not a good man. Ended up with 14 children. And she got married when she was about 17, I think. But anyway, what's interesting there is the fact that 14 children, and then her husband died a few years later, where she had to be in care of many of those children. Some had taken off and got married and whatever, but what a life she had to go through. And I remember visiting her in her dwellings, if you want to call it that. And it was like third country visits. Shacks that just barely, almost had cardboard on the tops, it seems to me. But what a terrible, terrible life she had in that way. But she was a spiritual example. I love her so much. And she made the difference of just someone to talk to and sing with, and she would have her guitar and a ukulele and sing with us when we'd come to visit, and it was just a joy. And then there's Jane. She was didn't get to know Jane very much at all when I was young. She married Harvin Hunter from Kilgore, Idaho, and Eugene Bench, and so they communicated, never met each other, Jane and Harvin, except through letters until they got married. And when they got married, they finally saw each other, which is remarkable. It's a interesting way to get your life started that way. And then Billy, he was my older brother, 3 years old, and he was his character. All these characters are characters. And he ended up as a policeman in Los Angeles areas, east of Los Angeles. And because of his law enforcement activities, he wanted to become a lawyer. And so what's interesting with Bill, he had 13 children, and he ended up, when he finally made it into his opportunity to become a lawyer, went to the University of Idaho in Moscow with 9 children. I hear some of the students up here talk about how tough it is, and I want to say, oh, I have a brother that went to school and had to provide for 9 children. What's with you? What's the big deal with you? He did it. You can too. But anyway, Bill has always been a great example of a dedicated, hard worker, honest to the point of obnoxious. Oh, no. But he is such that his lovely wife Jan and their family has always been an inspiration to me. And then there's Bobby. Bobby is actually older than Bill, but Bobby has always been almost a twin sister in a way of just relationship, just the closeness that you get to Bobby. And she married Merrill Rammel, and they're a dry farmer family, and so she came into plenty of money, but she never flaunted it. She just would always help and be so helpful, wasn't she, Mom?
She'd go to DI finding treasures like I do now.
Yeah. She'd go to DI to buy something for 50 cents or $1 and just come home so happy, and yet she probably had $1 million in the bank. Who knows? And wow, what a sister, and continues to be so. She is such a peacemaker and a welder of spirits in our family. And I've got to go visit her right away too, maybe tomorrow. We've got to go visit her. But anyway, and then there's Don, who is a constant companion in grade school and high school, and it got to a point where, well, in early years, I got to say this, we had our own language, and apparently siblings or twins will do that sometimes and create a language. For instance, my brother's name, we called him Lala. Ooh, did that concern him when we started to go to school. He said, "You do not call me that name at school." And so we didn't. If we did, we'd have been dead. But anyway, then just to show you the wisdom of the word, mpa was a short distance. Mpa was a long distance. Think about that. Huh? That's right on the money. Anyway, so we conversed with each other, and my siblings kind of learned some of our words, and they could interpret. And we didn't necessarily want that to happen, but that happened. Blythe, we didn't actually live in Blythe. We lived in a place near Blythe, California, on the Colorado River. Arizona was just over the other side of the river. And we lived in Ripley, which was down the road about, 7 or 8 miles. And it was almost on the Colorado River edge. And just to give you an idea of that area, farmland, you could go out, and Don and I had the choice of any watermelon in the field. They were ours. They were the farmers. And the carrots and the cauliflower, they belonged to us. If we wanted to eat a carrot, we could go get a carrot. And I look back on it and say, man, I've got a lot to pay for. Uh, there's something there that probably isn't right as I look back, but oh, it provided something to eat after school and before school, and hey, life was good. And so Blythe is a place out in the edge of the desert that at times would get over 120 degrees, and I don't think I wore shoes until I was in the 4th grade, literally. And so we had tough feet, and going to school there in Ripley, I look back and there are fond memories. It's a good little school. Mom had to teach there, and just after Daddy died, a year or so, our home burned down. And I remember Mom having to borrow someone's car, and Don and I rode in the back rumble seat, open air car. And when we got to our home, it was just totally burned out. And the one thing I remember about that was a lump of money, coins that had all melted together. And I wish I had that as a monument to that particular situation in our life. But here, after losing Dad, Mom loses at home. And all of the photographs and writings and everything that she had accumulated was gone. And it has taken decades and decades, it took decades, to replenish a few images from family members and others who gave them to us. But you know, that area was my childhood memory. Hotness, the swimming in canals. Mom never seemed to worry about us drowning. She just let us go to the canal and swim all day if we wanted to, you know, when school was out. And we did. And looking back, she had a lot of faith in us and let us do those types of things. But from scorpions to needles from mesquite trees and everything else, hey, we grew up with a few things poking out of us, and it was a good thing to go through. You learn a few hard lessons when you're little. You don't have to relearn them when you get to be older. And so that's a wonderful thing. You know, it's an interesting thing what was going on in my youth, because I was aware from a childhood point of view, perspective. And I remember the word Tojo. I remember the Japanese bombing Pearl Harbor. I remember seeing the flash of the atomic bombs, because they were north to us from Blythe, over in the Nevada desert, and the sky would light up and we didn't ever hear anything, but we didn't know what that was all about. And so I actually witnessed with my eye the atomic bomb blast. And I'm glad that the weather took it to Utah instead of to Blythe, because we would have been wiped off the map. I wouldn't be living it probably at all had the winds been reversed. I never thought of that before, but that's true. So growing up and coming into a situation where almost all my life to that certain point was being aware of the World War II, fighting Germany, fighting Japan, and looking upon them as enemies, and I would shoot rabbits and sometimes probably make believe that they were Germans and Japs, and wrong thinking, but that's the way it was. And so I learned to use a gun. Another thing that surprises me, that Mom would let us take a .22 out there and shoot rabbits. I mean, gee whiz, there's neighbors and cows and dogs, but we didn't shoot them. But anyway, it was a childhood that you just could not beat. Freedoms! Well, I thought they were freedoms. As I look back on them, they were. But on the other hand, she knew what was going on with us. She really cornered us if we got out of line. My first home that I can remember, and I think it's the Uh, yes, it is the only one that we started with in the Ripley area between Blythe and Ripley, California. Was a frame home that was all wood, and it was, in my mind, a pretty large dwelling, and that's when, as I mentioned earlier, we were at school, and Mom got the word that our home was burning down, and when we went over to it, it had totally been burned, and so that was a very tragic thing in her life. And the most interesting thing that happened during that period of time was the time that we had friends, Art Lee family, that had two girls in their family, and they became best friends to Jane and to Marie, our sisters, my sisters. And the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints was introduced to Jane first, and then later Marie, and they became baptized. And because of that association, they went to a branch in Blythe, and later we also attended that church. But the interesting thing about that is when our home burned down, the elders in that branch came forth and built our home. Mom bought the materials, cinder blocks in this particular case, and they built the home for our family to live in. And meanwhile, while we were waiting for that to be built, we lived in a tent, and I remember that as an adventure. I'm sure Mom didn't, but it was an interesting time to see what happened transitional-wise in our family through religion. And that had to impress my mother for the help that came forward in a crucial time in her life. And so that was a momentous, wonderful experience. At the same time, the war was going on too, and tanks and troops and airplanes flying over our house. And there's one pilot that was sweet on Jane, my sister, and so he would use our house as kind of a target to dive to attract her attention, and it worked. She paid attention to him, and it was a nearby army base that had airplanes or something near Blythe that caused that to happen. But to see the tanks go right in front of our place, the troops, they would congregate down at the end of one of our fields, and eat breakfast and stay overnight, and so the next day we'd go out there and get leftovers that they were left, and that was exciting. And one day I went over to neighbors and was walking back, and pickup was coming down the little road that was right by the canal, and so I ran to get out of the way and to go over a fence, one of these sheep type wire fences, and my arm caught in one of the loopity-loops, and I flipped over and broke my arm, and so that had to be corrected, and so I was taken to the hospital to get that taken care of. And that was the first time I remember being injured and having to go to a doctor or a hospital to have it corrected. The next thing that happened in moving from one home to another was the Art Lee family, they being members of the church, convinced my mother to teach up there in northern Idaho, near Sandpoint, Lake Ponderay, and a place called Algoma. And there was a two-room white house for school with a bell on the top, just traditional thing you'd see in paintings of the time of Norman Rockwell. But Mom had to teach all 8 grades at one time, and so Don and I were in the 4th grade at the one year that we first got up there, maybe 3rd, and then went into the 4th. I'm not real sure, but anyway, Mom had to teach all 8 grades, where it's too much for her. So what she did was take half and half. Half of the students in the morning and half in the afternoon. So Don and I had the privilege of just going a half a day for that school year so that Mom could survive the experience. And so it was an adventure to go home in the afternoon and not have to worry about school. Well, after Mom taught there a couple of years, then for some reason, I'm not really positive now. Used to think it was because Bobby wanted to finish high school down in Blythe, but that turned out, Bobby told me many years later, that wasn't the case. They went down there, but we stayed on a kind place. That's where Marie and Charlie were staying, living. I think they were renting it or leasing it, and with their family. And it was surrounded by the canal that went on both 2 sides of the place. And so we had a tent to live in for an entire year outside from their home. And I look upon that as another adventure, living in a tent, and dirt floors and the whole thing. And I'm sure, again, Mother, it was tough on her. But Marie was right next to us, and she helped out an awful lot. And when we'd get sick or whatever, she would help us out. And I remember her making sauerkraut. And she made wonderful sauerkraut and pickles, getting pickles together. And so, and I remember the special wonderful burgers she'd make, and she'd put potatoes in the hamburger, and that was fantastic. And so Marie helped a lot when Mom was there. And so that year was in a tent. Well, towards the end of that year, I had appendicitis attack, and it was a bad one. And I remember being carried to the car by Charlie, and he's a big, strong guy, and heavy equipment operator. And got to the hospital, and in those days, it was a 2-week stay at the hospital for appendicitis. Now it's in and out, and you just take care of it overnight or same day type thing. But anyway, that turned out to be a fun, I can't say fun, but I was able to draw and cartoons, things like that at the hospital. And then after I got out of the hospital, we went back to the tent. And then Charlie got mad at Billy, and there was a ruckus family collision there, and so we were forced to set up, get out of there. And so school wasn't over yet, and so we ended up taking that tent and setting it up just south of Blythe, out in a grove of trees. Or there's some big trees there, I remember, that Don and I would play in and enjoy. And so the last 2 or 3 weeks of school, we lived in that tent near Blythe. And so we were virtually kicked out of Charlie's place. Not Marie. She hated that. But that turned out to be a transition period from Blythe again back to northern Idaho. And then we went back to Idaho. The Artley family helped us to move back. And one little incident I would like to mention that was really interesting. On the way back on one of those trips to North Idaho, I remember out near above Lewiston and between there and Coeur d'Alene, maybe it's on the other side of Moscow, I remember a big 18-wheeler truck, and it wasn't even loaded, had stopped on the highway, and the road was soft or something, and every wheel went down into the hot, more soft asphalt. And I remember that truck just sitting there, buried with its wheels. And that, anyway, that was an interesting memory of that particular trip. Also, we had a car that Hartley broke down in while we were near Needles at that time, going up to Idaho, and had to replace that. And that was, for me, exciting and fun to see that happen, and to have a different car to drive on up to the north. Well, Mom had sold her place in Ripley and bought a ranch farm, 40 acres, up in Algoma, Idaho. They had a log cabin on it. It had a couple of outbuildings, and we lived in that, and we had a cow, we had a couple of goats. Mom had bought a Jeep while we were still in the Blythe area, and we went out in the desert a lot with that Jeep. Well, we had that Jeep in Algoma, and the goats loved to just go and jump in it and on the hood and drive Mom bats. And on top of the canvas top of the Jeep. And they just were fun little characters. And anyway, they'd go through the window of the cabin and get on the kitchen table, not the kitchen table, the dining room table, and make a ruckus and mess. And so we had to shoo those goats out of the house. We also had hundreds of rabbits, right? We got some rabbits, and they ended up living under our cabin. And I'd just perch myself on a rock and watch those little critters come out, and I'd grab them and play with them. And, you know, the same kind of little rabbits I'd kill to eat for food in the Ripley area. And so we also had rabbit meat there in Algoma. And so it wasn't, I wasn't unfamiliar with playing with the rabbits. The next thing you know, we had rabbit for dinner. And so, you know, it was a twofold life of being a lover of little rabbits and a killer of rabbits. Mm-hmm. And but I love the little dinkers. I'd love to have a little rabbit in my lap right now and just snuggle up to it. But anyway, that was our home, and then from there, our real life began when Jane and Harvin enticed us to come down to Kilgore and to Sugar City, Idaho, and we bought a home there. And Mom was able to sell that ranch up there in Algoma in a miraculous way, as I understand. It just, when she put it up for sale, it was just a matter of days that it was sold. It was done. And so the Lord was guiding us and moving us to where we could join the church, the rest of us. And so that's why we ended up in Sugar City in a little house right by the railroad. And so, hey, life in the church began because we were baptized, and Don and I were baptized in 1950 along with Mom and Bobby. I'm not sure about the others, how many were baptized on that same day. But that turned out to be a turning point for the Bird family and a wonderful, wonderful way in the gospel. Well, one incident I remember when I was a young student about attending school was in Ripley, and I was judged erroneously by a Quaker teacher, and she slapped me on top of the head with a ruler, a wooden ruler, and to make me be quiet, because she said disturbing the class. It wasn't me. I was so shy I wouldn't even peep. I wouldn't say anything. Anyway, so she judged me in a poor situation, and so that wasn't correct. So she was not my favorite teacher. I had good teachers. I look back through grade school and high school. My heavens, I had some wonderful, wonderful teachers that have, even for many, many years, and even to this moment, are some of our best friends who I had as teachers in high school. Eugene and Ken Brown, for instance, are an example of that. But it was a wonderful experience to go from Ripley, California to Sugar City, Idaho. But there was also some drawbacks, because that was a time that during those periods of time from 5th, 6th grade up to through high school, math was just out of it for me. I had just missed the basic instruction of mathematics, and so that crippled me in that direction, and so I wasn't able to cope very well with math. So that became part of high school experience. I enjoyed FFA because I had been working at the Davenport hatcheries, where they had tens of thousands of chickens, and Tommy Miyazaki, he had chicken farms that also had tens of thousands of chickens. He was a blind Japanese and lost his eyesight in the World War II. Wonderful, marvelous man, he and Mary and their neat family. And then Cal and Effie Davenport was the other family that were the chicken farmers. And so both Don and I worked for them for 8 years, grade school and high school, and even into college. Don did, and I moved out to a different way to work after that. But those years working in the chickens taught us so much, because both those men became kind of father figures. They were just marvelous in teaching us to work, and I have to say I learned to enjoy work under them. As dirty and as messy, as hard as it was, I actually enjoyed working with them. And I think the reason for that is that they worked with us, they praised us, they helped us side by side, and work became a life experience that I could relish. I could get my hands on it and do something. Well, the drawback too was that chickens don't stop laying eggs on Sunday. They don't observe the Sabbath. They just keep laying eggs, and they still need to be fed, just like children. And so Sunday mornings early, in fact every morning, sometimes I have to get up at 6 and 5:30 and go to work, and those chickens had to have hundreds and hundreds, thousands of eggs gathered, and so we'd gather them and take them into the room that had to, you'd clean them, you'd have to buff them, you'd have to box them and get them ready for the market. There are times that I broke a lot of eggs, like stumbling and falling, and a whole basket, hundreds of eggs in one basket would fall, and most of them would break. What a mess. The eggs were eaten by the chickens, though. They loved it if it was happened inside the coop. And but I had to explain to Cal and to Cal Davenport and to Tommy Miyazaki what had happened, and they were also always so gracious about it. Says, well, those things happen, and move on. Just do better next time. So anyway, chickens became a huge part of our life for Don and myself, even to the point in FFA, Future Farmers of America, one of my favorite classes at high school in Sugar City, under A.W. Burton, and he was a wonderful teacher. But anyway, we became chicken judgers, and we'd go to Moscow, Idaho, with the university up there once a year, and compete statewide in the idea of judging chickens. And one year I took third place in the state. No, that was in welding. Chickens we took first place, and then anyway we do chickens. We do chickens. Anyway, that was the main experience in high school, and the main subject that I liked the very, very, very most was Beth Bird. She mentioned about pets. She had a dog. She also had a dicky bird.
Oh, that's true.
Yeah, and so she was partial to birds. Not only a bird dog, but a bird, Dick Bird. And so that was a highlight of high school. Because I have to say this again. When she first came to Sugar City from Hooper, Utah, we went to a lyceum program where all the high school students were in the theater, Sugar City Theater there. And she was in front of me, in the row right in front of me, and about 6 or 7 seats over to my left. And I said to myself, I'm going to marry that girl. And I almost said it out loud. And man, I meant it. And so it wasn't too long where I got the courage up to ask her for a date, and we never stopped dating from then on. And so that was high school for me. It was Beth. And so, wow, that turned out to be a marvelous thing. I played football the last year, in my senior year. Don was a big star, and he had started when he was a freshman, so he outranked me and everything. But I played center, and I didn't do too bad. And so I'm glad I got 1 year under Farron Sonderegger, the same one that taught her algebra. And he was what a wonderful man. And to be able to live by Farron Sonderegger Jr. and his wife Paula right here where we are right now is quite a privilege. It's an honor to be associated with that family. You know, there's an important thing that I have to introduce into my life of the enjoyment I have in music. I don't play anything. I'm not a good singer. Sure, I've been in choirs and things like that, but when it comes to music, I just didn't have the talent. But I've always loved music. I love to listen to those like Norma Pincock, who sing like an opera star and ended up singing in the Tabernacle Choir. Cal Davenport was a member of the Tabernacle Choir at one time and sang beautifully. So music was a part of my life of enjoyment of listening. And when we'd date, we'd listen on the car radio or the Beatles and all of those other popular singers at the time. And there's a whole gamut of songs that they would sing, like Beth mentioned, brings back such wonderful memories that you just can't ignore those tunes striking a chord in us when we even hear them nowadays. And so music, even now as I paint and as I do things, even when I'm preparing talks, I love to listen to the hymns of the church. I love music in the background. Sometimes it's not in the background, it's screaming in my ears. But it's just sets the stage for creativity, and I love it.